Merry Meet, Annie here. This is a video about cemeteries and cemeterial things. It's actually my second video on the subject, and no, don't go looking for another one if you're interested. YouTube ate my homework. It was just a video that YouTube was not going to upload. Then I saw this really great video by Momcalzmesheri, and so I tried to upload it again, and it didn't work, so I'm going to record a new one, and hopefully have better luck this time. I was urged then, because I told her I had done a video on the cemetery theme, and then in the meantime found out it just wasn't going to upload, and then she in the meantime had commented saying, oh, I'm looking forward to it, so I'm going to actually make this a video response to hers. But as far as the energy of cemeteries, with very few exceptions, the energy of cemeteries to me has not at all been about those who are resting in the cemetery. It is not about those who have moved on. I've not encountered, with a couple of interesting exceptions, I've not encountered the energy of the deceased at cemeteries. I have encountered the energies of those who have visited the graves and who may not be there when I'm there, but I can feel what they were feeling when they were there, and that's interesting because the emotions run from, as you would expect, grief to really beautiful, gentle love, to anger, to confusion, all kinds of emotions. And I have had a couple of interesting experiences. I don't usually see apparitions of any kind. I might get a sense of them or just have a instinct or a feeling, but I don't usually see a form or a shape. This is an example of something that's happened to me more than once, where I was at a graveyard not too awfully long ago, where I saw two elderly ladies arm in arm. They were just so adorable. They were like the I'm going to wear purple kind of ladies, very vibrant, very colorful, but very elderly and really leaning on each other to walk. They were slowly coming up over the rise to the graveyard. They were visiting a grave that was actually pretty close to the one I was visiting. And they really caught my attention because they were beautiful and they were colorful and they were very elderly, and I was thinking, should I go over to help them? And I was keeping an eye on them, and they were doing okay, so I kept my distance and respected that they weren't so feeble they couldn't get to the other grave. And so I specifically had watched them walk across a pretty long field and up a small hill to the grave. And I looked away because I was in my own meditations at the place that I was, and when I looked up, there was a third person standing with him, a gentleman. And he was pretty firm looking. I just knew when I looked that I was seeing the person that they were coming to visit. It's one of those things that I just instinctively knew that he was the person they were coming to visit, that he was the one who had actually been buried there. And the logic part of me said, well, it could be just somebody they met or that they joined there, but no, I had watched the long walk it took them to get to that grave, and there was no way anybody else could have been with them. You had joined them when I had glanced away for a few minutes. And it was, they didn't acknowledge his presence, and he seemed very comfortable there. And I felt like I was, well, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. So I went back to my meditations at the place that I was visiting, the grave I was visiting, and honoring my departed loved one. And it had been a while, and I looked up, and he was there, and they were both there. And then obviously they were getting ready. They'd laid something on the tombstone, and they were talking to each other, and they got back, but they were holding each other's arms, and they turned to leave. And there was a noise where a car was like down the distance, and I looked away for just a moment and looked back, and as you might guess, it was just the two of them, and he wasn't there anymore. I have, on a couple of occasions, more than a couple, 3 or 4 occasions, seen the deceased standing near or with loved ones who have come to the grave. So there's something I have actually seen. Now what's unusual about that is I don't usually see the deceased. I'm not somebody who gives that physical of a form to someone who's passed over. I can sometimes feel them or feel the emotions they left behind, but these cases I actually specifically saw them. So that was interesting. That happened a couple of times. So then I am, out of curiosity, wondering what's the connection, because that place hadn't any particular meaning. However, all of the times that this has happened, when I've had the opportunity and then or gone back later, I've checked out the tombstone of the person who is the deceased. And in all of those instances, which we could say is coincidence, we're talking less than a half a dozen, 4 or maybe 5. In all of those instances, it's been a family plot. So that makes me think that the connection may be that one in death has been laid to rest with loved ones, and therefore there can be a connection to place where the deceased has a connection and can come back to and be present. In some sense, even after they've passed over. Every one of those instances, it wasn't just a singular grave. It was a family plot that had many burials already in it. So there's some of my experiences of the energies of cemeteries. I want to say, in a way, I'm uncomfortable in most cemeteries, and it is because I am not someone who is overly empathetic in my life. I am not somebody who has to block out the emotions of others. I seem to be pretty much oblivious to them, except for the emotions that they wear physically that you can see. I'm not somebody who has to worry about shielding myself from incoming from others and that kind of thing, except in cemeteries, walking through them. It gets noisy to me. The noise, though, is the emotions of those who were at the gravesides or visiting the deceased. The imprint they've left on the space, maybe because the space is so bucolic and peaceful and quiet. Sometimes it feels like I'm in a city. I don't find it always to be the most relaxing of place because I feel that energy, and it very rarely has had anything to do with the deceased. It has to do with the power of the emotions felt by the people in the here and now who came to visit. There's some of my takes on some of the things that happened to me in cemeteries. It hasn't seemed to be much about the deceased, except those exceptions I mentioned to you. One of my most powerful cemetery experiences was not too long before 9/11. I was with friends in New York and we went to Trinity Church. And if you're familiar with Trinity Church's graveyard, which is this unbelievably peaceful, green, almost garden, just gorgeous, gorgeous bit of respite in the middle of the city of Manhattan all around it. And when we were in the church itself, which was a very pleasant experience, and then we went out into the graveyard, I had I still don't know quite the words to put it, but it was something that rose up from the ground of the graveyard. I don't want to say it was the individuals who were buried there, but it was the spirit of the land. So what this might connect to is the conversation that you've all been having about the guardians of certain cemeteries, where you would want to honor that they're watching over the cemetery and be respectful of them and request entry and thank you for being allowed to spend your time there. But that's what this felt like. It was the spirit of the land itself. The graveyard itself had like a personality. And I didn't get specific words from it, but I paid attention because at first I thought maybe I was hearing something from the dead. No, it didn't feel like that, but it did feel like the spirit of place was speaking to me. And it was speaking to me in a very indefinite way of foretelling. And what it said was, it was like foretelling that the world was about to change, that it was never going to be the same. It was all that kind of that kind of energy. No specifics. No specifics. And it confused me because it was beautiful and very peaceful, and that's how the spirit of that land there in the midst of the city felt. And I couldn't put words to it even later when I thought back on it. It was like an intimation of things that were to come, because truly it wasn't much longer that the towers came down. and there was a picture within a couple of days of Trinity Church and that graveyard totally gray, totally covered with ashes. And it brought back to me the memory of when I was there, and I was just going unbelievably loose and peaceful at the way this felt, that some sense of the energy of the place said to me, it's never going to be this way again, or without those definite words, a feeling of it's going to change. Appreciate this because it's going to change. It was very indefinite what the words were, but boy did I remember that after 9/11, and especially when I saw the pictures of Trinity Church and the graveyard. And I remember being there, and this spirit of place, which is why I'm sharing this. It wasn't anybody who was at rest in the graveyard who was talking to me, even though I actually have ancestors in that graveyard. It wasn't that. That was not what was the conversation. It was the spirit of place. It felt like it was grieving something. And the feeling was that it would never be the same. And it was a little bit odd because the feeling I personally was having was, this is so beautiful, this is so peaceful to have this beautiful, beautiful, peaceful setting and hear the beauty of the city around me. And that's the point at which the spirit of the land kind of like, it was like a moan or the feeling of a wind going through it was going, oh, and this overwhelming feeling that, hang on to this, it's precious, it'll never be the same. So what I got out of that is spirit of place that was very, very definitely connected to the graveyard. I didn't feel it in the church. But if you've been there, it's an absolutely beautiful, peaceful church with a lot of awesome energy. Didn't feel it in the church. Spirit of place. I've certainly not felt that in graveyards or cemeteries that I've visited where my loved ones are buried. Outside of Trinity Church's graveyard, it's all pretty modern cemeteries. Not a lot of history to it. Maybe from the 1950s on or so. It doesn't really go back too far. And it could be that the spirit of place has something to do with time. And I also wonder, here's an interesting thing to ponder. Cemetery visiting and honoring of graves, decorating of graves, in the part of the United States that I live in, has gone out of fashion. People are buried and that's the end of that. If indeed they have a burial place, there's not much that happens there afterwards. So I wonder if this spirit of place that we feel in some of these beautiful older graveyards, which I definitely feel. I use the Trinity Church graveyard as an example because it's a very dramatic example, isn't it? Amazing experience, and I will never forget it. But old graveyards I felt the same thing in, including one old graveyard where I actually have my grandparents are buried. That goes way back in time. And I do wonder if what we don't run into, what we feel is this spirit of place, is the egregore, in a way, of all who have come. They have come for Decoration Day, they have come on family holidays, Easter and Christmas. The families have come, they've made a pilgrimage, and they've honored the departed. And I do wonder if what rises up from that doesn't create that separate entity, which is the spirit of place. And the reason why I think that is it seems to be more common in older cemeteries than it does newer ones. And the newer ones, especially where I live, I realize it may be different where you live, cemeteries are usually empty places. Very rarely do people visit graves. It's gone out of style. There's my thoughts on cemeteries. Someday we'll have to have a conversation about what we think about what we might call or might not call the deceased as ghosts in our outside of the cemeteries, in our lives, in the world, when we run into these remainders or these visitors of those who have passed on. There's a whole other interesting conversation which certainly the YouTube pagan community has had in the past, but not in the time since I've been here. So, Momcalzmesheri, which I am blanking since you're a new friend, what your actual name is, and I am so sorry. I promise I will make sure to learn it. Thank you for calling me out, and I'm so glad to have re-recorded my cemeteries video. I'm going to attach it to yours, but indeed, it's a conversation we've had in lots of interesting places on YouTube in the last couple of weeks. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part.